Okay. So a good amount of the times, I have clients when they're on like all fours to, when I see them really like just unevenly like supporting themselves, like when they're on all fours, just really defaulting into like the heel of their hand. I have them put wedges underneath the heels of their hands to encourage more grounding through here. Um, and I was wondering if that's just if that's more of an like humeral IR bias.
So yeah, I mean, if I want to QIR, I'm going to cue pressure going through right about here.
Yeah.
And it does, I've always wondered how much difference does it really make? It's impossible to measure really, but generally speaking, some people believe in it more than others. If you cue a push through here, you're going to get more internal rotation and pronation bias throughout the entire upper extremity. And then if you push through these two fingers, you're going to get the opposite, the supination, external rotation. So I mean, I've found before that if my shoulders a little achy during bench press, if I just cue a push through these two fingers rather than these, it can feel a little bit better. But I find it's also not consistent. Some people react really well to it. Some people do not. And is that a body awareness thing? It could be. But yeah, I think generally speaking, some people will benefit if you cue them towards supination or pronation to get the outcome you're looking for. You can also put a towel roll underneath one of these sides of the hands to get what you're looking for.
Also, and this more pertains to like when I'm teaching yoga and I'm seeing like especially like in the down dog position, like that 120-degree humeral flexion, and I see like people just sinking into their joints. I'll have them a lot of times. But what happens a lot of times is I see a lot of people doing this during like not being in their like coming up from their down dog and having to like shake out their wrists. Yeah. And because they're defaulting like all of their weight here, which like it means that like they're cutting off like blood supply to these that ulnar and radial nerve going up here. That's why they feel the need to shake it out. But like when it's in that overhead area, when I have them roll up like a blanket to support their wrist to press more through their knuckle pads, I have found that it does improve their shoulder flexion when they're in that inverted position.
Yeah, most definitely. I think just keep messing around with that stuff. Find what works, find what doesn't. I find whatever, especially in that position, we have a ton of wrist flexion. Is that extension, flexion? Yeah, extension. Gosh, I can never, the wrist is always, when you're in a ton of wrist extension, I find that can often irritate people a lot. And I'm sure you found the same thing, especially in those yoga positions, right? So I found when I have someone who has a wrist issue, when they do any sort of wrist extension, I find doing the classic Bill Hartman curl, where they are bent over with a supinated forearm and they're just kind of inhaling as they come up, exhaling as they go down. This is a pretty effective, just quick little tool to get them to kick on some of their supinator and also some of their wrist flexors to help balance them out. So that could be a pretty good tool. Quick little 1-2, you can try that, put that in your toolbox. Hopefully that helps.
Thank you.
Sweet. Anyone else have anything before we get started? Okay. So today is a continuation from last week. Last week, I used to have this be an entirely just one day thing where it would be all core, plyometrics, isometrics, all that stuff. But I found that presentation was just a lot and it was hard for people to kind of break everything down and digest it. So it's now 2 weeks and I think this is a little bit more appropriate. And I think you guys are going to have, it's good to get both sides. I kind of view this athletic development stuff a little bit, not a little bit, but significantly sometimes different than just like through the traditional gait mechanics stuff, especially as we get into sprinting. And I just want to say, first and foremost, before I was doing sort of more, I guess when people think of what I do now, it's probably more on the rehab side of things than anything else. But once upon a time, I was actually a strength and conditioning coach. That's what I wanted to do. I wanted to work with high level athletes just like anyone else when they just sort of start off in the field of strength and conditioning. That's always the end goal. But I think with my own experience, what I found is that helping just the average person is sort of what drew me in and truly making a change in someone's ability to live their life. That's kind of what draws me in nowadays. But when I was first starting off, I wanted to work with the best. So I studied this stuff really, really hard for probably 4 or 5 years. And so I think that gives me some sort of background to talk about these things. But the whole reason I'm talking about this is that this is not my expertise area. Sprinting, multi-directional speed. I'm not, who's an example? I'm not Derek Hansen. I'm not a Darian Barr, right? I draw a lot from a Darian Barr in particular, and also my friend and colleague, Jack Anderson. I'm actually using some of Jack's videos and a Darian's videos, all with permission, I've talked to them. They know what I do. So I will be linking their material. And I also understand that you guys don't necessarily work a ton with athletes. At least a lot of you don't. So I'm going to kind of go over the whole sprinting stuff in probably 10 or 15 minutes. And I'm going to link you to a Darian and Jack's content because I believe that they are the best resource I know of for the principles that at least I sort of gravitate towards when it relates to sprinting and speed stuff. So we're also going to talk about the core today, which I think is fun, and appreciate how it relates to gait, what the core's function in gait is, as well as how we can apply the principles of core training towards the model we're already using. And also within athletic type activities, because the body's still the body and sprinting is just an exaggerated version of some variations of the gait cycle or some stances and phases of the gait cycle. We're going to program different types of exercises for respiratory or compensation pattern. We can take all the exercises we're talking about today and then plug them into a program, and then be able to fully design a balanced training session for an athlete or someone who does want some of this higher intensity type of activity while respecting all of the things we've talked about up until this point. Okay, let's talk about the core. So there's about 1.5 billion different definitions of the core. Okay, am I recording this? Yes, I am. Okay, good. So you're going to find a different definition everywhere you go, but I like to keep things simple because I'm not sure where people are when they come into this program. So I just like to call it what most people would think of it, right? The area usually at your lowest ribs going all the way down into your pelvic floor. That's generally what I call the core. And I think that's what most people's definition is, minus the pelvic floor. Most people don't consider that the core, but I very much do. So if you consider kind of the area of diaphragm to diaphragm, I'm kind of calling that the core. So that includes your obliques, your transverse abdominis, rectus abdominis, spinal erectors, QLs, pelvic floor. Those are just the big boys I would consider here. The pelvic floor, I also used to go really deep into depth on the pelvic floor, but to be completely honest with you guys, I don't want to overwhelm you with a bunch of pelvic floor stuff because it can be pretty challenging, but ultimately I don't do that anymore, because if you just address all the principles that we talk about through the corrective exercise week, through the weight room week, and through this week, you're going to be working on the pelvic floor without a doubt. And if you ever do need additional help on the pelvic floor, you can just refer out, because again, we're personal trainers and strength coaches. We're not PTs. So the biggest misconception I see on the core is that it is designed to resist movement, which could not be further from the truth. It is going to resist movement, but you'll see traditional strength and conditioning coaches say, we do anti-everything, anti-lateral flexion, anti-extension, anti-flexion, anti-rotation, anti-everything. And then you're just training that goes against everything we're talking about. That stuff is really important to have in a program. You absolutely should. But if you're only training the core to resist movement, you're only training the core to be stiff, your athlete or your client is going to be stiff. It's input in, input out, right? Input output. So these two studies do a really good job of sort of summarizing this. So faster athletes in change of direction tasks display less trunk control, which is sort of counterintuitive when you think about it at first. Greater trunk rotation and lateral flexion towards the cutting side going into a cut, and trunk rotation in the new intended direction of travel coming out of a cut. So basically, their trunks move a lot more than what most people would probably anticipate what makes a good athlete. We think about control when we think about a good athlete, but relaxation and the ability to dissociate your pelvis from your trunk is also very, very important. Look at what Lamar Jackson is doing right here. Why do you think he's such a good athlete? Is it because he's really, really stiff? I don't think so. Faster athletes demonstrated greater pelvic rotation in their new intended direction of travel. If you can get in and out of a position very quickly, you probably need to rotate your pelvis a good bit, especially in and out of a cut. The basics for just basic core training stuff. I think we kind of already know this. Narrows are going to be better off in prone-like positions because of the influence of gravity acting down on them and expanding them anteriorly. Wides are going to be better off in sideline positions for the same reasons, just lateral compression. And left AIC people need a lot more left internal obliques and transverse abdominis muscles. Sometimes, if I really feel like it, I'll give someone a side plank on the left side only, and that's totally acceptable if the context is right. So we're gonna, this probably looks a little bit familiar, but we're gonna talk about gait as it relates to the core. There's actually not, when I was putting together this presentation, there's not a whole lot of good studies out there that talk about the role of the core in gait. There's a couple, and those are the ones I used for this presentation, but ultimately it's not as much as you might think. So concentrically, just remember that heel strike is a counter nutation in ER bias. Concentrically, our posterior pelvic diaphragm is going to be concentric. When I refer to the posterior pelvic diaphragm, I'm referring to, if you just want to imagine this pelvic floor right here, cut into different layers right here, you got half right here, you got 4 quadrants. So if I'm taking a step forward with he's going right leg, so let's do right leg right here. You can see how the posterior pelvic diaphragm is going to become concentric right in here, while that right leg is forward. Your ipsilateral internal obliques, your transverse abs, and your rectus abs are going to be more active at this state, because your ipsilateral internal obliques are trying to pull you over to that side, and your contralateral external obliques are trying to rotate you over to that side. And your spinal erectors on the same side are also going to be firing to stabilize you. The spinal erectors have like this very brief contraction upon heel strike to stabilize you. So that way you don't fall excessively forward, or you don't fall excessively basically backwards. Basically your trunk is trying to control you so you don't fall. That's a big part of it. So rotation needs to occur through that in order for that to happen. Eccentrically, your anterior pelvic diaphragm is going to be not firing at this point. And again, in heel strike, we're moving towards internal rotation, but we're not there yet. I hope these videos load. There we go. Okay, so if I wanted to train early stance, here's a couple of things you might have seen before, just in a different context now. So what does this look like? Ipsilateral internal oblique, contralateral external oblique, and getting a very similar, at least stance, towards what we're looking for here. Weight heavy over the front heel. If I wanted to add a little extra juice to this, sorry, this video looks like it was taken on a potato, and for some reason it's extremely fast. You see how my heel's elevated right there? You could bias it towards a negative tibia angle. And here I'm sensing that same exact thing. So I'm sensing my contralateral external obliques turn me into the stance leg. So now we're putting a lot together with that exercise right there. And you might look at that and say, well, that's a cable push. Well, you can make the intention and do a core exercise, just lower the weight and make sure that they're sensing all the right things. You can turn these things into sensory motor exercises, and you can really toast their core if you change the intention. So you're going to see some things you've seen before, but they're just now with a different intention. Mid stance mechanics of the core. So now again, remember, we're looking like something like this, right? So most of, really all of our weight is now being held on one side. We're in AFIR. Our anterior pelvic diaphragm is going to become concentric. Our ipsilateral external oblique and rectus abs are going to be more active. And the contralateral internal oblique is beginning to fire to help begin the process of pulling us over to the other side, but we're not there yet. It's just beginning to fire. So in mid stance, basically right around 20-ish% of the gait cycle, we are now in full amounts of internal rotation. We're beginning to move towards external rotation, but we're not there yet. So don't let this confuse you right here where it says externally rotating. It's from a place of internal rotation. So if I wanted to train mid-stance mechanics of the core, then I would probably want to train the ability. Okay, stop talking. There we go. This is one of my favorite ways to do that. I'm in single leg stance. I've got my adductor, I've got my glute med, and I'm rotating over to the side. I think it's really important to make sure that we train the obliques for rotation. I think it's really, really important because that's a huge function of what they do. Yes, they're involved in breathing and they're involved in all these different respiratory functions, zone of apposition, all those good things, but we also need them to be able to rotate our trunk. I've never seen an athlete where it's like, yeah, you know, we don't need to train rotation with you at all, because rotation, the transverse plane, is everything. You'll hear people talk about the imaginary sagittal plane, like, yeah, rotation is everything. But if I also think that's a little bit reductionist, because the sagittal plane does exist and it is important for us to talk about it like that. But if you really break it down, going back to week one, if we don't have rotation, we don't have anything. This is another fantastic position. And look at what's happening at this moment right here. So, okay, next. What does this look like? So I've got a split stance, right? I'm feeling tons of oblique on the bottom side, cross connect, alternating gait pattern. This can be a lot of things. This can be a straight up core exercise. This can be a corrective. This can be a lot of things. But what might not be very apparent is what I'm doing with this bottom leg right here. This is basically me pushing into my arch. So if you're in this position, I don't necessarily want you feeling a ton of adductor, which a lot of people will feel. What I really want you to feel is your glute. So if you look at what I have right here, I'm on my left side. I've got my left abs. I got my right glute. Beautiful. Okay, late stance mechanics of the core. So here I've got sacral counter nutation, external rotation bias. Concentrically, my posterior pelvic diaphragm. This is very similar to early stance, right? You just think about the limb arc bone. Contralateral internal oblique, rectus abs, spinal erectors are going to be more concentric at this point. Ipsilateral external oblique, because now if we're looking at that right leg, we now need to begin the process of loading the other leg. So we need to begin our trunk rotation to the contralateral direction, and we need those internal obliques to help pull us into that opposite side hip at this point. A couple of ways you can do this. You've seen this exercise before. So now I'm going to teach myself to push out of the right side, drive out. So here I'm rotating my trunk back to the left. You guys see how this happens? I'm really leaning heavy on that front foot too. I'm probably going to have a lot of weight on my forefoot here, just naturally because of the direction. You could even lean further forward to get a positive shin angle if you really wanted to go that way too. You can make these cable presses, you can make these core exercises, you can make these correctives. You see what I'm saying? Like, it's all about the context and what you're using it, the load at which you're using it, and what you're having the person do and think about while they're doing it. And this one right here, this is a tough one, but I think it's a pretty good illustration of an exercise that combines a lot of the principles together. So lifting up the left knee, left adductor, pushing through the right arch, right glute, and then I'm hanging on to my left abs right here. I also have a degree of trunk rotation naturally. If you guys can see it at the top position right here, my trunk is rotated towards this leg right here. So really, I have my external obliques rotating me over to the mid stance leg, which is my left side at this point. So hopefully that gives you guys a little bit of ideas and context. You can just go back through the entire first week or last week and think about how can I make this into, you know, an oblique dominant exercise, or incorporate a little bit more abs with it. Because all of the exercises from last week, for the most part, have a degree of abs within them. It's just the context at which they're working matters a lot. What about some other stuff? What about regular stuff, right? Like, what about just the traditional core stuff? Well, just think about the principles I talked about before in one of the first slides here. More prone-like positions for a narrow, more sideline positions for a wide. And you can still do this stuff. People still really enjoy doing exercises that burn the crap out of their core. It's just a matter of, can you also incorporate a little bit of something you're trying to get as well? So for example, on this kneeling cable oblique crunch, people love these things because it burns them, but also you're getting alternating expansion compression right here. I'm going to breathe in this position right here and look at what's happening. Can someone tell me where the expansion's happening in that position right there? Anyone?
In the anterior right rib cage, or no?
Why would you say anterior right?
I don't know.
Talk it out.
Okay, because no, it would be like in your posterior, like upper rib cage. It's because yeah, no, hold on.
No, you're right, Amy. You're right. You were right the first time when you said anterior right.
Okay. Yes.
Yeah. Yes. Because my spine, I'm turning my trunk to the left, therefore my spine is going right. Therefore, I'm closing off a little bit posteriorly of what's going on with the back right side. So air is going to very much go into my right anterior chest wall. Also look at the angle of my humerus, it's at 90 degrees. And then because of gravity pushing down, anterior expansion. Notice how my sternum's not overly depressed here as well. That's another good point. I'm not really trying to like jam myself down into a traditional ab crunch. I'm trying to keep my sternum relatively up. And then right here, this is another one I really enjoy. And then if I'm in this position right here, where is the expansion happening at this point? This can be a corrective too. I got wall reference, my knees are off the ground. You can also put your knees on the ground for this, and it's still a burner if you do it right. So in this position right here, where I'm heavily recruiting my right obliques, yeah. So where is air gonna be going here?
Right anterior, lower?
Mm-hmm, I'd say so, yeah. I'd say right anterior for sure. Also a little bit of left anterior, I would say. In this position, you'll often see people engage their pecs because their knees are off the ground. And if that was the case, I would just put their knees on the
ground. I have a quick question.
Sure.
With that previous position of pulling the kettlebell, when you put like a plate, like an iron plate, like on someone's like low back,
mm-hmm.
that would that help them to just, it's just more of a stimulus to help them to kick on more abs?
Yeah, I think that's a slippery slope.
Okay.
Like you see the people do the planks with like 345s on their back. It's like, wow, that's impressive.
Right.
That is going to, in my experience, promote an extreme rectus strategy unless they're really, really, really strong. And that's not the end of the world. If you really want to overload the core, maybe that's a good tool to have in your toolbox. But I think I would not do that with someone until they are highly competent in the ability to, dissociate their six pack from everything they do, which most people struggle with at first. But I think, yeah, that can be a tool. I just don't use it a lot. But yeah, you could. I don't want to ever say something's bad.
I mean, I've used it as a just not like a very like heavy external load, but as more as a stimulus to not shift the hips, swing the hips so much.
For sure. Yeah, and if that's the context you're using it in, I think that's totally appropriate.
Okay.
All right, isometrics. So isometrics are. Oh, sorry. Was there another question?
Yeah.
Go ahead.
I wanted to ask. So what we just saw is your exercises for core, or we will see more of them?
So that's just the principles of it. So really, ultimately, just think about the principles, and then you can really you can make stuff up at that point. You can put people in positions. And there was a lot of core stuff in the last week too that you can reference. I just wanted to get onto, I didn't want to spend forever on core stuff because I also want to tackle the other stuff.
And would you consider med balls core training? Med ball throw?
Med ball throw is core training. Well, I guess technically everything would be core training if you want to look at it through a certain lens, but I don't really consider med balls core training now. I think they have a heavy core component, but I think when I refer to core training, just for the principles of, being clear, I think this stuff is what I would consider that. Something that's isolating the core heavily. And really, that's the focus of the exercise, is to get an adaptation within the core, or to have the core serve as a very important player in the exercise. You know what I mean? Like this would be a core exercise, or you can make, or this would be a core exercise, depending on where it is within the program, what the cues you tell your client are, and the load that you use. So really anything can be a core exercise if you make the intention for it to be one.
Okay. No, because in my mind, when you're talking about the anti, like not everything should be anti something, what it looks more similar to the transfer of power from hips to shoulders from the core. It would be like med ball throws, something like that.
Yeah, we're gonna hit med ball throws in a second here, but yeah, I think, if you want to think about it throughout your own definition of how you define the core, I think you can definitely consider med balls in there. I just, for my own purposes, don't, because I find a med ball, like when I'm using a med ball, I'm trying to get a specific adaptation within sort of, how do I put it? A different point in the force velocity curve, right? I'm trying to train the adaptation of power and high velocity. And these are not high velocity drills. But you could maybe, if like, let's say, for example, what's a traditional med ball exercise? I don't even know. Like a Russian twist, right? A Russian twist, that could be a core exercise. I would just question, like, what is the adaptation you're trying to get out of that?
Okay.
And also, I should follow up on that point. I don't want to like say Russian twists are bad, right? Like if some people really like to do those things, and if that person really wants to do a Russian twist to help them stay compliant, then I think that's great. Okay, within isometrics, there are two different types. There are isometrics for performance and isometrics for health. So the isometrics for health are going to be generally longer in duration. The muscle is going to work harder and harder over the duration of the isometric as the tendon relaxes. So essentially what happens is we start in, let's say, a lunge-like position, and then the tendon is going to eventually stretch. The muscle is going to take over because the time is just so long that the muscle is going to have to kick on more and more in order to maintain that position. This is going to increase neuromuscular efficiency at specific joint angles, as well as increase work capacity and recovery if you use it in the right context. But also the joint angle, I believe, is plus or minus, what is it? I think 15 degrees. Someone can correct me if I'm wrong on that, but I believe that's what it is. So if you wanted to increase the neuromuscular efficiency, for example, at the bottom of a squat, then I would probably want to be around 90 degrees of hip flexion when I'm doing that and holding that. For performance, that's going to be more stiffness-like things. These are things like wall switches. If you guys have ever done those drills before, where you have an athlete up against the wall, bringing one leg high, bringing one down. That would be an example of a performance isometric. Also, starting in like a lunge position and then taking off from there would be an example of a performance isometric. And then to progress these things, it's no different than anything else. You just want more time, more frequency, and harder positions. But there's really, under those, there's also two more different types of isometrics. So we have overcoming isometrics and we have yielding isometrics. So overcoming isometrics are inherently extremely compressive. They have to be because you are basically just giving a maximal amount of effort over a period of a short time. So here, right, you can see how I'm pressing up into this. That's max effort, but I would not do this for a very long time. And again, what is the joint angle you're trying to get? So here, I'm trying to train the bottom of a Zercher position or front squat, anterior loaded squat position. So I would probably hold that for no longer than about 15 seconds because beyond that, you can't really put maximal effort in. And that is the point of this overcoming isometric. Also, this could be a good way to get a high training stimulus without inflicting too much physiological damage. I was actually in preparation for this presentation. I try to update these every single time I do them. So I was talking to my friend Jack Anderson that I'll show you some of his videos in just a second here, but he was telling me how he was talking to who was it? It was some strength coach, and he was messing around with some off-season training stuff, progressing towards a transition to in-season work. And what he had him do was all their athletes, all they did was overcoming isometrics to help get a high training stimulus, and then over speed banded work, which we'll see in a second, band assisted work. That would be, for example, putting a band around your waist, pulling you into the position. And their numbers went up more than they had ever within the last 3 years. And when I say numbers, I mean their athletic assessments. Like their broad jump, their 40 time, their 20 time, things like that, all improved more than when they were just lifting weights. They weren't lifting almost any weights. And that's an N=1 study in terms of a program. So I don't know how much value that has, but it's kind of an interesting thing, right? It really should get your brain churning a little bit. So yielding isometrics are going to be better for longer duration and tendon health rather than performance. So this would just the most basic example in the entire world right here is this.
Mostly their heels optimal.
Right? We've all seen that before. That would be an example of a way you could do that. Okay, let's get into some plyos a little bit. So I have not yet brought up this role of the guts as much as I have in the past because I like to introduce a little bit of concepts every week and not just kind of throw the kitchen sink at everyone right away. So when we inhale, I think we know this at this point, the guts are going to descend, the pelvic floor is going to descend. So this pelvis opens up a little bit for the guts to drop down. This also happens when we absorb force, right? That's why ER is force absorption. And then exhalation, internal rotation, you spring up, right? The guts are going to be pushed upwards. So just a little Bill Hartman quote here, because this is what he likes to talk about a lot. So obviously this is kind of like his wheelhouse. The normal abdominal viscera have no fixed shape and no fixed position. And every description of them must be qualified by a statement of the conditions existing at the time of observation. So basically what that means is that you can't just look at the guts as you would look at a rib cage. The rib cage is a structure that has a solid foundation and should be a certain way, generally speaking, across all humans. The guts are not like that because depending on where they are, they just slosh around. And the reason why they slosh around is because we need them to slosh around. They help provide momentum for us. So for example, if I'm going to go into a jump, then the reason why partially a non-counter movement jump, meaning I go to the bottom position of a jump, hold it, and then jump up from there, is not as powerful, or not, you can't get the same output, is that, well, first of all, you're not utilizing the stretch shortening cycle, that's for sure, but you're also not utilizing the momentum of the guts coming down into the pelvic floor and then trampolining them, if that's even a word, and pushing them back up and using that momentum to then drive yourself and create that force into the ground. This is, I believe, I want to say Eric Huddleston is sort of like the godfather of these oscillatory isometrics right here. But really what these do is teach a stopping and halting a momentum of forces into a cut, into a jump. This is basically the guts discussion we just had. But the principles of gait training still apply. So if I wanted to do that in a position of laid stance, I would do that in a rear foot position right here. Basically what you do is you let go of the weight, catch it, and try to redirect the forces out of that. It's gonna be a really good tool for teaching people to stop their momentum, redirect it back out with a load. You can do this in a front foot position as well. I thought about doing, I actually tried to film this with contralateral load and it just felt awful. So I think I would probably not do a contralateral load with this. I would probably do it just like this, and it's totally fine. For narrow ISA plyometrics, we need them to compress, right? No better way to do that than through plyos. So what I just did right here is rear foot elevated split squat jumps. Teach them to push. Teach them to not actually be on their sort of heels or toes the entire time. Get them to be a little bit athletic, sense the ball of their foot, and drive through that. Get them a little bit more propulsive, right? This is also a great way to do it. I'm using a foam roller here because I couldn't find anything better at the time of filming, but you could use a PVC pipe and it'd be a lot better. These felt awful for me because I'm super compressed already. So to compress me more and have me do this is not a good call. I would not do this with the wide, right? But these are great for narrows who need to learn to compress. Another way you could do this is you can just put them on you could have them sit down on a 90-degree box of hip flexion and then just drive up from there. That could be another great way to do it. Wides are going to benefit from more of the early stance and absorption mechanics. So as you can see on these front foot elevated split squat jumps, it's a little bit more absorbative. I don't even know what I'm saying with that word. There's a little bit more absorption going on with this. You can sink deeper into hip flexion. Let the guts fall a little bit more. See how this works? Not actually, you're having to halt your momentum, let those guts drop, and then you can't actually express all that compressive force that wides love to do. These are money. They're also kind of fun. In terms of plyometric programming, what I would do is 2 to 4 times a week. I would not go beyond 20 to about 60 contacts a session, generally speaking. Sets and reps are so variable because it allows a progression to happen. But generally, I don't go beyond 6 reps unless you can get in some really funky stuff like some Joel Jameson aerobic plyometric stuff. I'm not going to go into that because that's beyond the context of and the scope of this program. But go read Ultimate MMA Conditioning if you're interested in that kind of stuff. Rest 1 to 3 minutes. You want a lot of rest. It's like sprinting, right? A lot of people are really keen on getting people to sprint, have no recovery, then sprint again. That's a really good way to hurt someone. Same way with plyometrics. We want them to be able to have a lot of rest to allow for their tissues to recover and heal before they go to the next session. Because if you do a ton of plyometrics really quickly, and I hate to throw something under the bus, but CrossFit is a great example of this. People aren't ready for that. So we need to build up the tissue tolerance. And even when they do have the tissue tolerance, still allow them to get some good rest. And then no more than 2 to 5 movements per session, usually, unless I'm really trying to have plyometrics be an extremely large focus of a program, which I'm not going to go beyond 5 movements a session.
I have a quick question. So what you were saying about, I understand that like HIIT training is extremely popular, but most of the general population does not have the tissue tolerance for that either. And also like I've noticed that there's not really, like when I like study these like HIIT videos, there's not a lot of rest time between exercises. And so, so the general public is not really meant for HIIT training. However, like highly trained athletes it's more geared toward highly trained athletes doing that. Like what you said, like in the MMA, like training, you know, whatever.
Yeah, I think they're not ready for it at first. I think anyone can train and be ready for that stuff. And also depends how you're doing. Are you doing HIIT with sprints? Are you doing it with plyometrics? Are you doing it with box jumps? Or are you doing it on like a rower? Or are you doing it in a rower mixed with, you know, some mountain climbers mixed with some, I don't know, some battle ropes? You know what I mean? Anyone can do that stuff. But in terms of the sort of higher intensity, higher ground contacts, then probably not. That would be something we for sure need to build into.
Okay.
And we'll get into much more of that stuff next week in energy system. Okay. So when we're using med balls, there's a couple of different tools you can use to get someone to express force better. Pronation would be a great way to do this. A ramp would be fantastic. I'm not using a ramp here. I'm using this plate because I did not have a ramp at this gym, but you can see how that would allow me to load into that back hip better, get that AFIR, and then drive out of it. Same thing with dorsiflexion. This is just sort of a Camperini style med ball toss. If someone really struggles to hinge, AKA narrows, into their back hip and produce power out of it, I would pick one of these tools depending on what kind of a med ball throw I'm doing. Okay, now let's get into speed training. And I just want to, again, preface this by saying I get pretty much all of my speed training principles. I started off just like anyone else who learned speed through guys like Derek Hansen. And I sort of have changed my opinion a little bit over the years of how I would train someone to improve their sprint mechanics. And I credit a lot of that to Darian Barr and Jack Anderson. They make a very solid argument in terms of why we need to sort of rethink the way we traditionally train speed or teach speed training, not revolutionize it. There's just a couple of different things to consider. When I say a tractor, that's a Franz Bosch term. That means basically something that should be universal across the board, regardless of the context of what you're doing. Like this should be there all the time. Athletic posture that's a no-brainer, right? If your chest is collapsing, then you're gonna have a really hard time running fast. Transverse arch, this is one you guys may not have heard before. Some people argue this doesn't even exist, but for the purposes of the mechanics, it does exist. And this is basically that, I bring out my football. That's basically this sort of, it runs laterally, right? And this is the arch we always talk about, but there's also this transverse arch. Now, if you guys want to feel it, go ahead and stand up with me. Okay, so stand, and if you can get your socks off, it's usually even better. But what you want to do is you want to move your pinky toe out laterally and then press the ball of that pinky toe down. Drive into it, lean onto it, and that's going to cup the rest of your arch, your medial arch should come up, and you should feel sort of this sensation of your foot doing this, like coming inwards like that, a tripod sort of sensation. That is what creates torque within the foot for you to sprint. So when you're on the ground and you're driving, remember sprinting is such a late stance heavy, mid and late stance heavy action that you don't really have the ability to fully utilize the windlass mechanism where you are pronation here and then come off. That starts with the lateral border of our heel, but we don't do that when we sprint. What we do when we sprint is we land more on our midfoot. And because of that, we utilize the transverse arch quite a bit to create the torque to allow us to push off from. You guys can't really see that well. Push off from. So you land more on your midfoot, utilize the torque and drive. So I will tell you from personal experience, I spent a week in California with Jack, who had just got done with basically learning for like a month from a Darian. So we were working on these principles together, and I was sprinting in sort of the ways I will show you in a second. And I was utilizing this transverse arch concept. And it is just staggering how much you feel your calves and your Achilles work compared to the traditional idea of pushing and triple extension, right? There's two parts to speed. There's the concentric. This is what you always, if you've ever tried to teach someone sprinting or taking a course or something like that, you'll hear push the ground away, triple extension. And that's all fine and well, but if you're only teaching the person to push and get triple extension, then they're going to push themselves and triple extend themselves right up into the air. And you start to make this more of I'm going to basically have to restart my running process every single time because I'm jolting myself up in the air because I'm trying to push, as opposed to working with gravity, which would be the yielding, which doesn't, in my opinion, get enough respect as this concentric idea. How do you measure pushing? How do you know that they're doing that? How do you measure yielding? It's through the shin drop. If the shin drops, then you're going to get a positive shin angle. If you get a positive shin angle, you're going to transfer over to late stance mechanics quicker. You're going to have a sense that you're falling at first, especially when you learn this. And then that is what's going to allow you to then utilize gravity instead of working against it to then drive into a faster acceleration phase. So this is a screenshot taken from one of Adarian's videos, and look at what happened right here. This is a shin drop, but what you might see people do traditionally is drive big, huge pushes, and you'll see what happens. This is a good example of that using Jack's video. Okay, look at what happens when he pushes. You see how he just stands up? That's a perfect example of what's happening when you teach that huge push the ground away, stand up, lose all your horizontal projection. You see how he's like floating in the air a little bit? He stood right up. Okay. If you guys want to keep yourselves muted. Oh, hang on. I'm going to see if I can mute everyone. Okay. So, like I said, without the yielding, you're going to see what you just saw right there. Now, that looks nothing like what this guy's doing right here. Take a little peek at this. I'm going to let Adarian do the talking.
Hands come off the ground. Shin angle change. This comes through. You see the hip over the top. All right.
One more time.
Boom. Hands come off the ground. Shin angle change. This comes through. You see the hip over the top.
You guys see that? Let's see if I can find.
All right, so we got him here. We're going to watch him. The one thing to talk about is this here, is this simple thing. Shin drop, boom, hip lead the way over the top, boom.
You see that?
So same thing there. Boom,
does that look anything like standing right up?
Boom, shin.
See how the shin drops right there?
And that becomes the whole thing. Shin.
That becomes the whole thing. That's a perfect summary. This is universal across all sports, by the way. This is not just a sprinting thing. Watch javelin throwers. Watch soccer players. Watch baseball players hit a baseball. Shin drop equals force production every time. It doesn't matter what you're talking about. Triple jump, go watch those people. Go watch people throw a discus. Go watch people throw hammers every time. Let's see what example this one is. Yes, this is a better example. Now, you guys might watch this and go, what is he doing? But this is him. What is this? I believe this is like 70 weeks later. You might look at that and say that's a little funky, but I'd say he's running faster. Shin drop. Boom. Compare that to the first one you saw. Basically, what that's doing is it allows for the quickest transition to late stance mechanics, utilizing the transverse arch. Looks like we might have some. Oh, Kim, yeah, I'll put these in the exercise playlist, the same one. So in max velocity, you still have the shin drop happen. Oh, bummer. Okay, we're good. All right, let's take a look at this. Shin drop, shin drop, shin drop. You see this cycle that happens? You still need to have this happen at max velocity. It's still more upright, obviously, but notice how he's landing on so much of his forefoot. That's just transverse arch. There's not a whole lot of windlass mechanism happening there. I'll answer these questions at the end, really, one sec. So the idea of remove and replace is really where the transition happens from how someone like a Darian would teach sprint mechanics versus someone like, I don't know, someone who's trying to teach like the triple extension push. And I don't want to demonize the triple extension push because I think it's a really effective teaching tool for an athlete just learning how to sprint if utilized with these sort of yielding concepts as well. So what the remove and replace thought is you would tell someone instead of the triple extend to, as soon as you feel like that foot's coming off the ground, replace it on the ground with the other foot. That's going to prevent them from pushing too much and allow them to get that falling sensation. That also allows for that calf to hamstring that you just saw in that previous video. And just to sort of summarize, the optimal mechanics is marrying these ideas of the traditional sprinting stuff to the eccentric yielding methods as well. There is a balance of both, and obviously within the scope of this presentation and course, I can't go in. This is like a 16-week course, right? And this is like knowing the basics of sprinting already. I don't know where you guys are at, so I would really recommend, if you're looking for more on this stuff, go look at Jack's stuff, go look at Adarian stuff. Adarian has courses on his website. So just some starter drills to teach the shin drop would be, I'll include these within the exercise selection week as well. So you're gonna do it, there we go. So this is sort of like a lunge in a duck walk position. You see that? Great starter exercise. And this is literally just a duck walk. Because people don't know what this feels like. They don't know what it feels like to actually have their shin drop. because most athletes have been taught the opposite for so long. So using something like this in pre-running warm-up is really effective. Something we also did when I was working with Jack was we would start in a sissy squat. We would have me squat down, and then as soon as I felt like I was going to fall, take off from there. That was the starts we did, and it felt so much better. It really did feel like once you get it down and you get past the awkward phase, it's it feels great. It really does. Some drills to get the calf to hamstring are these squatty runs. This is also great for Shen drop too. He does a lot of talking, and I'll link these videos if you want to hear him talk. Basically staying in a slight degree of hip flexion. You see, he was moving there. He's not really moving slow. So what that's doing is that's teaching him. Let's see if I can slow that down. Yeah. Well, that did not accomplish what I wanted it to. Here. Oh, that's so obnoxious. Okay. Yeah, I can't slow it down enough. But basically what he's trying to do is he's trying to pull his calf to his hamstring and that remove and replace cue. Now this one is a little bit higher intensity. This is basically a broad jump, and you'll notice how he's falling. You might look at that and be like, well, that doesn't look right, but it is because he's falling. You need to teach people the ability to actually get the sense that they're falling forward, because that's how you actually get someone to project at the angle that you want them to project at. And the whole idea is if you're falling and you're literally falling, then you're not moving fast enough. The body will want to catch itself via that crossed extensor reflex. If it senses that you're going to literally fall on your face, it's going to move you faster to prevent that from happening. Now let's get into a little bit of band assisted and resisted stuff. So when it comes to resisted work, such as this right here, this is sort of like a lateral push to base, which, by the way, if you ever teach a shuffle, please never teach it like the galloping shuffle. They should be pushing off of this inside edge right here. That's a shuffle that allows them to move quicker. Now, this band resisted, this is going to require a grayer, overcoming, and propulsive strategy. You're going to need like more aggressive plant angles, obviously, to overcome the resistance of the band, but you're also going to have an increased pelvic floor concentric orientation to stop the downward momentum of the guts. So really what this is doing, and there's an argument to be made here, that you would rarely want to use band resisted methods because it's pulling the guts in the opposite direction of where you're trying to go, which is really counterintuitive to how the actual human body moves. So we could also use this in the right context for someone like a narrow who can't really produce enough force and get that proper pronation. And this applies to anything, by the way. This is not just those band assisted lateral shuffles, right? This could be a jump, right? This could be a resisted vertical jump, like really anything. So band assisted then is going to increase the yielding eccentric strategy. That's going to pull me into the direction I'm trying to go, which in terms of just the guts discussion is probably more advantageous. This is going to increase or decrease the eccentric strategy necessary and increase the speed of the concentric strategy. So that has to occur quicker. It's over.
Sorry, baby, I'm really hungry.
And it's going to decrease ground contact times, which is beneficial for people who are kind of slow on their feet. Think your wides. And yeah, I would probably lean towards more of this band assisted stuff. In a lot of programs, you'll see people view this as like a progression, like an end game sort of thing. Once you have a really good athlete, I think it can be used on day one, especially with someone who really struggles to be quick on their feet or they feel like they're really stiff, right? That I would use that assisted right out of the gate. Okay, so now just to summarize, let's say I had a wide ISA with secondary compensations and they're an intermediate athlete. I would do a 90-90 side plank startup. We kind of already, literally I copied and pasted the same warm up from the one last week for the wide with secondary and compensations. I would do a med ball scoop toss, probably more of a lateral variation of it, so I can get that person to sense some rotation. I would do a weighted depth jump where I have that person basically take a step off of a box, land, and have to absorb that. And then a front foot elevated oscillatory isometric split squat. I'll go into my front squat, landmine bent over, alternating row, rear foot elevated split squat with a bilateral load, because if I have an athlete and I'm trying to get some output, this is clearly more of an output driven session, I would probably just have them go bilateral load. And then a single arm lat pull down and a neutral grip, and split stance banded chops to sort of bring them back to that early stance within their core and get them to sense that rotation. And also that's going to give them some posterior expansion as well. If I had a narrow ISA with primary compensations, just to give a totally different athletic context here, single leg hamstring marching adductor pull back with a bear crawl. And then I would do the med ball scoop toss, probably more of a sagittal variation of it with a rear toes elevated like you guys saw, the compressive box jump, and a rear foot elevated oscillatory isometric split squat. I would then go to a safety squat to a 90-degree box, dumbbell chest supported row, anterior expansion, rear foot elevated split squat with a forward hip shift and bilateral load, half kneeling single arm pull down, and a single leg Pallof press with rotation for more of that mid stance core training. All right, that was it on that week. I'm sure this was a lot. There's a lot of different, there's a lot of stuff going on here. So I would just say that if you want to learn more, check out Jack, check out Darian. And if you want to learn more about these oscillatory isometrics, check out Eric Huddleston. What questions do you guys have? Anything at all? This is the.
I'm sorry. I just had a quick question on the. So what are their cues? Because that's a big thing we do is a lot of movement training, and our cues are to push, get your foot through as quickly as possible, but not up. So what's the cue for the shin angle? What do you? I know the drill's like falling forward, get him to feel that, but what are the cues?
Remove and replace, I think is a really,
that's what you're saying, just remove and replace. Okay.
Yeah, because that prevents them from spending too much time on the ground and trying to project upwards.
Okay, that makes sense. Thanks.
Anything else? Do you guys, who here works with athletes? Do any of you guys work with athletes? Tommy? I know Kevin does. Keith?
I have like 3 marathon runners.
Okay, cool. Athletes for sure. Do you have a question?
I have a question.
Oh, go ahead, Raul.
But it's not from this week, but I was late today, so I couldn't make it. Can I make it now?
Yeah, for sure.
So this week I was playing around with the deadlift variations. So I'm used to work with like the regular unilateral deadlift without any support. And trying all these variations, I felt like I was really stable, and working with only one weight and not like a high weight, I couldn't feel much what was going on. Like, you know what I mean?
You were having trouble.
I felt like I could go a lot heavier than that. And I couldn't find myself like, okay, what I'm feeling more here, or with this one or with the other one, or not many difference between them.
You're talking sensations, right? Of musculature being recruited, for sure. Yes. And I would say that that's really, really to be expected, because it's still a hinge pattern. So you're not going to feel massive differences across the board. And there's also the point of looking at you, and you do your assessment on week 4 and all those things. You're similar to me in the sense that like you just have a lot of compression. And I think you're narrow and you've compressed a little bit more. So I find that doing those hinge variations with narrows who are in the secondary layer, they tend to really struggle to sense different things because A, hinges aren't their game anyway. And B, they haven't really developed a sensory motor competency yet to feel those things in those positions yet. So I would probably do more of like the split squat stuff with you at first. And then I think down the line, once you start to feel those things will click more. It's just really hard putting someone who's compressed in a hinge position, getting them to feel the right things. But I would say, yeah, just generally speaking, you're not going to feel the difference as significant as a split squat variation, because with a split squat variation, you have the ability to put them in like a rear foot position or a front foot elevated position. You can't really do that on the hinges as much.
It was like more like a test before I give it to my clients. So if I give it like a part of the workout, so they expect to feel something or get tired or something. So I don't know what to ask them, like what you should be feeling this, or try this, or you know what I mean? Or don't go heavier, or go heavier if you don't feel it, or.
Yeah, I can cover that pretty quick. So if I've got a rear foot elevated position, all right, let's say I've got, if I'm here and I'm going to go into a hinge, I'm going to feel a lot more of glute. What I like to cue is like, do you feel the AFIR? Do you feel the pelvis moving over the femur? Do you feel that sort of very light stretch in your back pocket there? If they're doing it right, then they're probably going to feel that. But also if they're doing it right, they're going to feel a little bit of hamstring on this front leg. So when I cue, I like to say, push this knee forward as you go back, and look at how that knee doesn't really move, but the intention to do that is going to engage this front side hamstring. It's also going to allow me to shift my pelvis back on this side. So if I don't do that, what you'll often see is something like this, where the knee travels backwards and then they kick on their low back a little bit more because their knees start to extend. So I would say, push this knee forward. Boom. That's much more hamstring, much more adductor. If I'm going to do a rear toes elevated position, since I'm biasing IR, I should feel this stretch a little bit more, but also a little bit more adductor. Okay. But overall, you should feel that AFIR. You should feel a little bit of hamstring on the back side and the front side, and you should probably feel your glute working on the concentric portion of it.
So it's more like hip shift work or that kind of stuff.
What's that?
It's like this. It's more like hip shift work. Like you should be stretched on that side, a little bit in the inside, depending on the.
Yeah, like feeling the single leg stance muscles, so to speak, a little bit. Yeah, you can look at it like that.
Because the regular single leg deadlift, where would it fall? Like if I want to give it to someone, which kind of activity would be?
If you're talking no foot elevation, just split stance, I would say if you're doing a contralateral load in that position, I would call that more of a heel strike to mid stance, probably leaning towards a more mid stance. If I'm doing an ipsilateral load, it's probably going to be more mid stance, moving towards late stance as you come up.
Okay, awesome. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
I have a question, Connor. Sorry.
Yeah. Who had that question?
You can go first, Amy.
You are so sweet. Thank you so much. So assuming that we give duck walks or like those or those shin drop like lunge walking kind of things, we're assuming that that our athlete does not have any kind of like gripping like sensation in like the lateral part of their knees.
What do you mean by gripping sensation?
Like the side of their knees hurts.
Yeah, I would make sure they don't have that for you. If there's pain, I'm never going to do something with someone. Okay. But yeah.
However, what if you have them? If you have them foam roll that IT band and then have them do it, is it still okay to have them do this kind of drill?
Yeah, if you get rid of the pain, I think that's a win.
Okay. because I mean, I'm thinking that because this is for one of like my marathon runners, this is we've been dealing like with issues, IT band issues a lot, and like knee bending stuff. But and I know and I understand that foam rolling is not it's not a permanent solution. You know, I know that it is a very like short-term fix, but it does really help to manage that kind of pain and that kind of discomfort.
And yeah, if that does the trick, then by all means do it, I say. I think if someone likes foam rolling and it works, then I'm going to have them foam roll. You know what I mean?
Okay, just making sure. Thank you.
Yeah. Ryan?
Yeah, I was gonna say, so let's say you're doing a core exercise and you want to get some more expansion in an area, like you were talking about the oblique cable crunches, for example, or a chop. Like normally, I think when we think about inhale and exhale, we think about exhale on the concentric of an exercise, or when you're kind of like almost bracing, or like you do a chop and you exhale as you do that chop. But here, sometimes it seems like you want expansion, but you might be in the wrong like inhale, exhale, because you expand when you inhale, you're not expanding when you exhale, right? So like we're not getting good inhales and we're not getting inhales at the right position. We're not getting air into that area, right? So like where would we want to inhale and exhale on those sorts of exercises?
Yeah, I would say it is going to entirely depend on what your goal is. And it's just like the presses and pulls, right? Whatever is tight, then no air is going there. Whatever is more eccentric, air is going to go there. So think about what's eccentric, what's concentric, and then cue the breathing respectively. Like on that kneeling oblique crunch, I would probably want them to exhale as they go down and then inhale in that bottom position because their oblique's going to be engaged as they go down, shutting off air from going into the stomach, and you're going to get the more anterior expansion. And that's the same reason why on the bear, like all four breathing, you want the obliques on when you inhale because that's going to force air to expand the chest.
Right. So like you could exhale to get into that position with a good contraction. Inhale once you're there and hold it, and then exhale again maybe.
Yeah.
Or something.
Yeah.
That makes sense. Cool. Thank you.
Anything else?
Yeah, Connor, this is more general, if that's okay.
Yeah.
But I have the privilege of working out at like one of the best like powerlifting gyms like on the East Coast in New Jersey. And so I'll give you an example of like there's this kid who weighs like 205 and his top set the other day for his like low bar squat was like 620 for 5. Okay. I mean the guy's a meatball, but like ridiculously strong. And you know, I'm seeing him warm up today. He's doing like a squat day. And the first thing he does is like some jumping jacks. Then he kind of walks around, maybe he like goes to the bathroom, does a few goblet squats, like stretches out his glutes, and then just kind of gets under the bar and starts squatting. And then like 10 minutes later, I see this guy come in who benches like 550, and he just grabs a band and starts doing some like banded retractions and, you know, all that good stuff. And I'm like sitting there thinking to myself, like doing my, you know, my kettlebell arm bars and my respiratory squats. And I'm like, you know what? Like maybe there's something to just like doing some jumping jacks and like getting under the bar. But I'm wondering like if those kinds of things are the exception and we should just ignore it, or like because success might leave clues, if I should like take note of that and maybe like stop overthinking as much. I was just wondering like what your general thoughts were on that.
Yeah. I think my brain goes to what I told you guys, I think 2 weeks ago or something, where I said that people trained for a very long time and didn't really have a ton of issues without these principles. So I think that's one part of it. But I think the other part of it is I look at it like a potential of risk type of situation where if you are going to do those banded pull aparts and you're going to do whatever like the traditional lens would take, then maybe that reduces, and this is so incredibly hypothetical, I'm just using this as like an example, maybe that reduces your risk of getting a shoulder injury in your bench press by like 20% for whatever reason. But I think looking at it through these principles and thinking about how they're going to apply towards your bench press and then implementing them correctly in that context, I find that, and obviously I'm biased as well, I think that's going to have a greater percentage a lower percentage in terms of your overall risk of injury, but it's going to be relative to your genetics, your biomechanics, and if you're picking the right exercises. So that's the thing, is that it requires a little bit more of the thinking aspect of things, but I think it's going to overall reduce your overall potential for injury. Whereas those guys, maybe they have really good genetics. Maybe they're onto something, but I think also they're just so incredibly compressed and they have such a high proficiency of movement in those 3 specific lifts that it's like they're masters of their skill. You know what I mean? They know how to do those 3 lifts, and they don't do a whole lot else that's going to put them at risk to, hurt themselves, right? Like they're not going to be going and probably playing games of pickup basketball. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I'm definitely on that. I'm definitely like, I agree with that. And the best thing is like when I'll see someone who, comes in and has like a 700-pound like top single at like a 7, and he's warming up with a slingshot, like a booty band, walking around the gym like a duck. And of course I can't say anything to him, because he's this monster. But yeah, no, I appreciate the insight.
Of course, man. Do those people, do you know if they ever have aches and pains or anything?
Yeah, so one of them, he's my good buddy, Gavin Adden, who's like this, he's a pretty young guy, but he's like top of the USAPL right now for his weight class. And he always complains about his right shoulder / pec. Because he's always like just like a left AIC bench, and always complains about his right, like the lowest part of his IT band, sort of by his knee.
Yeah.
And he was talking to me today about like how his squat is asymmetrical, and of course, like I'm like, oh, well, did you know? I started talking about like. I was so stupid that I started talking about like the anterior chain and like maybe how that could connect. And I'm just like, and he was kind of interested like a little bit, but like he doesn't give a shit,
Yeah, they don't care. Yeah.
But yeah, he's definitely in pain. Yeah.
Yeah, and see, that's the price they're paying. Maybe if they were doing an approach you were doing, they wouldn't be in as much pain. But yeah, I think this stuff, and this is still where the field is going. That's why I like what Bill Hartman does, is like he makes this stuff applicable to people who don't want to just lay on the floor and breathe and do that stuff. Like you can do an exercise and still get an adaptation. But yeah, ultimately it's so hard to reach athletes and people with these principles unless you're actually having them do dynamic movement and stuff that makes them feel like they're doing work.
Yeah, for sure.
Connor, I could say one thing. I've been a strength coach for 25 years. And it's funny, Ben, you mentioned that, but that's, you have, for our athletes, for them to be interested, like just breathing and things like that, I always have to keep them dynamic. And I've always seen athletes pay the price down the road doing what you're talking about. So they're going to pay the price sometime. So it might just be a little further down the road, but that's the reason I'm doing more of this now, because I've seen the other side of that. So you're taking the right approach.
Thanks, man. I appreciate that.
That's a great point. Anything else, guys?
I just wanted to say that wide snatch grip on deadlifting. Actually, like I tried it out like this past weekend, and I'm actually able to handle more weight on the barbell. Because my grip is better. It's not slipping out of, like, my thumbs aren't slipping, and like my index fingers aren't slipping as much. And that's usually like the first thing to go. Like, even though like my body can handle like more weight or like more reps, it's just like, oh, it's just coming out of my hands. But I just want to say that has been very helpful.
Good. I'm happy to hear that. That's awesome. Yeah. Grip is, a lot of people can lift more than they can grip. So I totally understand. Anything else, guys? It can be anything. Not related to this week at all. Oh, next week we're doing energy system stuff. Personally, I love that week. It's probably my favorite week, just because I find it fascinating. I think you guys will too. So make sure you're there next Monday as well. The review session. The review session is obviously going to be moved probably to maybe the weekend, because I'm packed the next 2 days. So I'll probably move it to Saturday or Sunday. What was your question, Amy?
That was my question, actually.
I got a quick question, Connor. It's general. Yeah. So you said before that like you almost never see a wide ISA with more IR than ER.
In their shoulder, yeah.
Yeah, in their shoulder, yeah. Like you see, because I noticed that it seems like you see a lot of narrows who are more primary shoulder-wise, like they got lots of ER, no IR, but you don't see any like wides who seem to do that. So like, why is that even? Why do we? Why is it primary if they never get there? You know?
Yeah, I think it's because, frankly, like. I think for the purposes of archetypes and having something that's like, this is what to expect, and having it be pretty with the opposite presentation in each. I think that everyone has a secondary compensation to some degree. It just depends on what, like for the same thing, I would make the argument with narrow ISAs. Like I've never seen a narrow ISA with a very perfectly you know, they have their full hip extension, you know, they have their full ability to, they're basically not in a degree of anterior pelvic tilt. You know, narrow ISAs pretty much always are, because they need to compensate, right? Just like we need to compensate to do that. So basically what I think wides like to do is it's very, very easy for them to depress their chest and find an exhalation mechanic to get all this air they have out of their anterior stomach and also chest wall. And they're seeking a way to get that air out. So the easiest way they can possibly do that is just
right, so it's just like the easiest secondary compensation for them to get.
For sure.
And then for narrows, it's a different part of the body. Okay, cool. Thank you.
Yeah. Oh, I think there was a question up here. Kim, is this also why you want sprinters to keep some APT, as they need to be falling forward in order to have more horizontal momentum forward? Or is it more that you want them to maintain some powerful compression to stay powerful? Both, 100%. I think you nailed it on both. Yeah. Thanks, Amy, for the message. Anything else, guys? All right. Well, I will see you guys probably this weekend for the review session. Be there, and we'll hit some more good stuff. I'll see you guys later. Have a good week.
Thanks, Connor.
Thanks, Connor.
Thank you, guys.